My message for today continues a brief look at the book of James, a text that we began last Sunday. Today, the focus shifts from our using eyes to judge others to using mouths to offend. So please hear these words from the third chapter of James, verses 1 through 12, as translated in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistakes in speaking is perfect, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. If we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships. Though they are so large that it takes strong winds to drive them, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue, a small member, yet it boasts of great exploits. How great a forest is set ablaze by a small fire. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by the human species, but no one can tame the tongue, a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse those who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and brackish water? Can a fig tree, my brothers and sisters, yield olives, or a grapevine figs? No more can salt water yield fresh. This is the word of God for the people of God, and we can say thanks be to our God. And now please join with me in a word of prayer. O God, may the words from my lips and the meditation of our hearts and minds be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. It was just a slip of the tongue. I didn't really mean to say that. Oops. Many a relationship has been diminished, even ended, because someone blurted out a hurtful statement. Many a conversation turned ugly because someone made a false accusation or repeated an offensive online post. Perhaps we've all done that at one time or another. Perhaps 2 times, 3, more. We didn't really mean to say it. It was merely a slip of the tongue, a simple mistake. But the words came out. The words hurt. The words led to conflict. Perhaps a relationship even ended, at least for a while. James was certainly onto something, for I suspect he had experienced something like these examples. Perhaps he had uttered a hurtful phrase, passed on an unfounded rumor, or been the recipient of a careless critical comment. He certainly also would have overheard such utterances by others. And so James described the tongue as a restless evil, full of deadly poison. The Jewish people of James' time would have been aware of biblical examples of inappropriate comments and of the cautions incorporated into a number of scriptural stories. For example, in the beginning, the serpent lied to Eve, encouraging her to do just what God had forbidden. A little later, Abraham was lucky that he didn't lose his life over the falsehoods that he told the Egyptians about Sarah being his sister and not his wife. And then Jacob, well, he stole his brother's birthright in part by deceiving their father, altering his voice even to sound like Esau in order not to be found guilty of lying to his blinded Isaac. And Joseph, well, Joseph's brothers in turn lied to Jacob, their father, after they had sold their young brother into slavery, pretending instead that he had been eaten by a wild animal. And these are just in the opening chapters of our Bible. And you'll come to think of it, James would have known of those and other stories, but also of Peter's relatively recent declaration that he did not know Jesus, that he was not one of his followers. Poisonous output of an evil tongue in the courtyard of a high priest? I would certainly say so. So what kinds of statements might constitute such evil emitted from our mouths? What I think of first are words that hurt, comments that are taken personally by someone, whether heard directly or learned of later as rumors were spread and stories were retold again and again. Among those hurtful forms of communications are the falsehoods. Sometimes they can be readily corrected, their lies revealed, but often such statements take on a life of their own, difficult to stop from spreading. A comment may blame the wrong person for some committed act. A motivation might be misinterpreted. A person's actions may be judged by another's different standards. And it's possible that such offending words may not even have been uttered with malice. It may not have been the speaker's intent to hurt. But hurt comes nevertheless. And of course, there are times when the very intent of a statement is to inflict harm on another person. But it doesn't necessarily need to constitute a lie for someone's talk to hurt another. Sometimes the truth can hurt as much as the falsehood. For example, the truth can embarrass. If one of my high school classmates were to begin regaling others with tales of my football feats, it might be highly amusing for them to hear and distinctly uncomfortable for me to be present. After all, a high school senior who stood about 5'4" and weighed perhaps 115 pounds isn't likely to have been the star running back for an undefeated team. Now, of course, if I was there, I could get defensive. I could try to enter the conversation. I could note that I indeed was the best senior running back that Coach King ever had on one of his squads. Well, the truth is I was the best senior running back that he ever had on junior varsity. But I know of a number of situations where an embarrassing story like that can be deflected by an attempt at humor, at self-abasement in an effort to maintain a modicum of dignity. But the tongue, nevertheless, is at work. Another example, when my friend Gordon Henry begins to tell stories of the summer when he coached me in Little League Baseball, he talks about how short I was and how relatively little playing time I got. Now, he's not out to hurt. He's sharing what he believes is a very humorous and innocently told story. And then, if I'm there, I always tend to counter by noting that my batting average that summer was 1,000. I went to bat 18 times, got walked 17 times, and ran out a ground ball the last hit of the summer. Now, neither of us was lying. Neither of us was hurt. The poisonous potential in a story gets neutralized, and all continues to be well between us. So it goes to show that the tongue isn't always the source of poison. But remember that the tongue can utter harmful, poisonous truths that can betray confidences, that can spread secrets, that can inappropriately release information before it should be made public. How many times have you been aware of a broken promise to keep something secret and then heard just the opposite? So whether it's statements that are true or false, the tongue can be the source of much hurt felt by another person. But what about words that hurt at a broader level? Statements that have societal, not just personal impact. Our media today are filled with stories of conflict between vaccine promoters and anti-vaxxers. School board meetings as close as East Grand Forks have been disrupted by angry citizens arguing with each other over the value of masking versus personal freedom. People argue about the 2020 election still. Was it tainted by widespread fraud? Has QAnon been correct about secret organizations seeking to undermine our democracy? So many stories and so much wonder about what is coming from the tongue. Now, we recognize that falsehoods have been a part of political debate for as long as we've had campaigns for public office. They've been promoted by all sides of the political spectrum. But I believe that we are at one of the high or low points of uncivil discourse, as persons assail their opponents with greater and greater falsehoods and accusations of dishonesty. But it's not just about politics today. It's about public health, public safety, even public education. How long will some doubt scientific facts? How long can the documented and long-term effects of climate change be ignored? Probably as long as persons are willing to use their tongues and their other media outlets to deny and to denigrate and to defend falsehoods. And beyond the falsehoods, there are unhelpful truths in the public arena, things that are best left to more private, less invasive settings. I sometimes think that there should be more acceptance of the statement that just because you can say something doesn't mean you should. And I'm reminded of the classic Disney line, Thumper said, Mama says, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. But let's go back for another moment to James' time and realize that the various forms of verbal behavior, such as I've just noted, would have been just that, verbal. Voiced comments made by an individual that were heard by one or perhaps even just a few other persons. Sure, those comments might have been passed on as rumors would be, but then only to a limited number of persons, usually in the confined area of a single neighborhood or a small village. Only in the most extreme cases would such a story be maintained over the years, and then likely with the changes seen in oral history, with emphases changing and exaggerations entering into the continued passing of time. But we live in a digital age, a time when verbal messages often are preempted by preferences for the written word, a written word that can be sent out through many media. Now, a falsehood created in a Facebook post can be spread literally around the world, and if sensational enough, heard or seen by millions. Want to use your evil tongue to get back at someone with a perceived slight? Just use Twitter. And just as we can blurt out a harmful word before we consider its impact, the same is true with the variety of media that we have available today. I often think it would be prudent for all of us to adopt a 24-hour rule. Write an email or a tweet or a post, and then wait 24 hours before hitting send or otherwise releasing the message to the world. But that's not always, perhaps almost never, the case. Got mad at someone? Get your vengeance now. Want to pass along the latest gossip about a foe? Send. Don't wait. Don't even think about it. Now, James, in talking about the tongue and the use of words to hurt, hinted at some wonderful metaphors for inappropriate language, hurtful words, and perhaps even messages with truly evil underlying intentions. He talked about them as fires and horses' reins and ships' rudders. In the reality of this summer's heat and arid winds, we've been reminded that a spark can set off a blaze that roars across thousands of acres, perhaps destroying dozens or even hundreds of homes and other buildings. A runaway forest fire, we have learned, can quickly consume an entire community. And so it is with a message as short as a tweet. Just a few words that once in the ether of the internet can destroy a reputation, disrupt a relationship, as they circulate among one social group after another. And a rumor or other hurtful communication is as hard to control as the fires from California to the Boundary Waters. It's a whole lot quicker to repost and pass along than it is to track down and delete. And while James compared the relatively small size of the tongue to the also relatively small size of a ship's rudder, I'd like to use the seagoing image in a little different manner. Just as it is often difficult to bring a wildfire under control, it is often difficult to bring an ocean-going vessel to a stop, or even to make an emergency turn. As the world's oil tankers and container ships have gotten larger and larger, the mechanisms for steering and stopping have become challenged to greater and greater degree. One of those large vessels traveling at a normal cruising speed could take as much as 15 minutes to come to a halt or to complete a 90-degree turn. And during that time, the ship would travel as far as another 1.5 to 2 miles. And then I wonder, how far could a deceptive or destructive message travel before an attempt could be made to stop or deflect its damage? And so, as persons who can originate almost any kind of oral or written communication, as well as ones who receive such messages, what are our responsibilities as Christians, as loving disciples of Jesus Christ, as recipients of James' cautionary message? As noted earlier, one appropriate action would be to adopt a rule that delays the sending of any message for an appropriate time of reflection. Do I really want to send this message? Have I written this to appropriately reflect what I meant to say? And while we can't dictate such a cautionary rule for others, we can certainly apply it to messages we receive and consider passing on. Should I really share this? And if so, who are the most appropriate recipients? And who should I not share this with? So as we consider our words and those of others, we should think of the impact of the message. Who could be hurt by this message? Would such an impact be necessary? Am I being truthful and not hurtful? And finally, what responsibilities do we have as recipients of hurtful words, whether spoken directly or received via electronic gadgets? Should we try to stop such messages from spreading? Should we try to seek and stop the source? Oftentimes that may not be possible in regard to electronic messaging. It's way too easy for persons to send anonymously, to cover their tracks, to cowardly accuse, to covertly lie. Are we willing to reply to a Facebook post with citations to factual sources that could combat falsehoods? Are we willing to contact and console persons who have been targets of evil tongues, evil tweets? Whether words are emitted from a mouth or transmitted by typing fingers, they originate in a human mind. Perhaps today we should talk less about the tongue as a restless evil and instead realize that the poison really rests in the brain and perhaps in the hardened heart as well. From wherever or whatever, let us now and in the future heed James's ancient and yet so contemporary advice to be vigilant in our communication, careful in our language, and compassionate in our interactions. Let us seek to prove wrong his assurance that no one can tame the tongue. Let our tongues and our minds not be filled with restless evil, full of deadly poison. Let it be so. Amen.